Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Monday Night Travel with Rick Steves Europe. My name is Emily Burks, and I am delighted to be your host for this St. Paddy's Day evening. Tonight, we are exploring 4 regions around the world with Celtic heritage with the help of 4 different tour guides. That includes tour guide and chef Emma Ledoux, Irish-American musician and writer Melanie Beth Curran, and 2 of my lovely co-hosts, Gabe Gunnink and Lisa Friend. And on that note, I think it is time to begin our destination exploration. But before we get to our 4 Celtic corners, I want to do a quick historical overview of the ancient Celts. So, who were the ancient Celts? The Celts were a collection of ancient tribes with origins in Central Europe as early as 1200 BC. At one point, they were the largest group in ancient Europe, occupying much of mainland Europe north of the Alps, as well as Britain and Ireland. But they never were a unified kingdom. Instead, they lived in hundreds of separate tribal chiefdoms, living together in small farms or in hilltop forts, like this one we see here. And they were unified by a shared language and distinct culture. One aspect of that distinct culture was their art. The Celts were talented artists, leaving behind incredibly intricate and sophisticated metalwork and jewelry, like this Celtic torque here, which is essentially a ring for your neck. Today, the Celts are often remembered as these war-hungry barbarians, but we found so many artifacts that prove otherwise. They were a complex society, and their metalwork alone shows that they had incredibly advanced technology for their time. There is some mystery surrounding the Celts because they left no written records behind, and that was no accident. The Celts were illiterate. They chose not to write anything down in an effort to safeguard information. In fact, we don't even know what the Celts called themselves. The term Celt actually comes from the Greek word keltoi, which is what the ancient Greeks named the Celts when the 2 groups came in contact with each other for the first time in 540 BC. So instead of writing their history down, they memorized it. Harp-playing Celtic priests called druids and poets passed down religious tales of pagan gods and folk stories from generation to generation. And other members of the Celtic learned classes were responsible for memorizing and applying the laws of the land, as well as the centuries of relations between Celtic tribes. It's thought that the Irish's gift, the legendary gift of gab, is actually a legacy of this Celtic oral tradition. But without written records, the legacy of the Celts has been shaped by the biased accounts of their enemies, the Greeks and the Romans, who frequently frame them as barbarians. And the Romans, Julius Caesar in particular, used this messaging to justify a large-scale military campaign against the Celts in the 1st century BC, during which Celts were killed by the thousands and much of their culture in mainland Europe was destroyed. But Rome was not successful in conquering all of the Celtic world. On the northwestern shores of both France and Spain, Celtic tribes persisted. And in Britain, the Romans conquered England, but the Celts fled north and west into what would become modern-day Scotland and Wales. In 120 AD, the Romans built Hadrian's Wall to protect Roman settlers from the Celts to the north and to mark their northern end of their empire. Today, this wall is close to the modern-day border of England and Scotland. And in Ireland, it was a different story. The Romans never even attempted to invade Ireland, and instead, Celtic culture dominated for 1,000 years, starting in 500 BC. As a result, Irish history forever skewed in a different direction, becoming Gaelic and not Latin. And so today we have these bastions of Celtic culture that have persisted in spite of outside influences, which is a source of pride and distinction for many living in these regions today. And now that we have an understanding of how Celtic Corners came to be today, it's time to visit our first Celtic Corner in Northwest Spain. So please join me in welcoming our tour guide of Northwest Spain. He is the tallest leprechaun that I've ever met. It's Mr. Gabe Gunnink.
Hello, happy St. Patrick's Day, Emily. I am often following rainbows, so that stands to reason. And Sláinte.
Yes, Sláinte, Gabe. Thank you for joining us this evening. And Thank you for all your help behind the scenes tonight.
Of course.
Yeah.
It's always an exciting evening on Monday night and wonderful to be with all of you. And I'm excited to start talking about my favorite Celtic corner in Europe, which is what I like to call the Atlantic Northwest. So we live here in the Pacific Northwest in the US, but we are going to go to the Atlantic Northwest of Spain, where I had the privilege of studying abroad. And so this was in 2012 that I was studying there, and I got to study in the city of Oviedo. And so let me pull up this adorable picture of a young Gabe in Oviedo. So I studied in Oviedo, Spain, which is the capital of the province of Asturias, which is one of the least traveled provinces in Spain. And you can see it's just half an hour from the northern coast there. Now, when I studied in Spain, I was expecting to see layers of rich history. I was expecting to see Roman history, as we can see in this aqueduct in Segovia, just outside of Madrid. I was anticipating seeing the intricate palaces of the Moors, as we can see here in the iconic La Alhambra in Granada. I was expecting to see medieval walls and cathedrals, as we see here in Burgos, one of my favorite cities in Spain. And of course, I was expecting whimsical avant-garde modern art and architecture, as we can see here in Barcelona. This is Gaudi's Park Güell. What I was not anticipating was being on a run in the afternoon through the streets of Oviedo, just my normal afternoon run, and happening upon, of all things, a bagpipe concert. Now, I wasn't running with my phone, so this is just an image that I found online, but I actually ran into dozens of gaiteros. So the Spanish bagpipe is called the gaita, and so somebody that plays it is a gaitero. And what I would come to learn in my history classes about Spain was that the Moors, when they came up from Africa in 711, they quickly took over 90% of the Iberian Peninsula. But that northwestern corner is the 10% they didn't take over. And for that reason, the Celtic heritage persisted more strongly than in other parts of Spain. Now, I was no stranger to the Celts. The year before this, I had studied abroad in York, England, where we'd also learned about the Celts. So when Emily asked me if I would talk about Northwest Spain, I'll confess, I thought, this is going to be easy. I'll talk about how Celtic culture, as everyone knows, started in the British Islands, where it's iconic, and then made its way over to continental Europe. I'll use the bagpipe as a great example of this trend. And as I started doing just a little bit of research, I realized that this was not going to be as easy or as obvious as I thought. In fact, this slab right here is considered the earliest depiction of a bagpipe. It was in the year 1000, and it was found in a settlement on the border of modern-day Syria and Turkey. So the bagpipe did not originate anywhere near the British Isles, and that made me start to question, what other misconceptions do I have about Celtic culture? We see an image here in the Oval Office with President Reagan celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and we see this is kind of in one picture, the American view of Celtic. We have a bagpipe player, we have a leprechaun, we have a lot of green. I also thought, how did it come to pass that there is an American basketball team called the Celtics? What would the Celts have actually thought if they saw this image, and who were the Celts? So I started doing some digging, and as Emily mentioned, the first and earliest archaeological finds of Celtic cultures in Europe actually came from grave sites near this town. Now, all of you at home, call out if you know this town. If you said Hallstatt, Austria, you are correct. So this was kind of the seat of what was called the Hallstatt culture throughout the Iron Age. And it's generally accepted amongst experts that the Celtic culture started somewhere kind of in the middle of Western Central Europe, maybe Eastern France, Western Germany, Switzerland, that area. And from about 1000 to 300 BC, it spread to the far corner. So it spread as far east as Anatolia in modern-day Turkey, and it spread up to the British Isles. We can see here, this is an illustration from the book of famous ancient Greek geographer Strabo, in which we see kind of that whole middle section of Europe is just called Celtica, the land of the Celts. In this map, we can see the names of a few tribes that are still with us today. So when Julius Caesar launched his Gallic wars against those Celtic tribes, the one that he said was most ferocious was the Belgi tribe. And actually, when they finally took that over, they named the Roman province Gallia Belgica, which today is modern-day Belgium. So we can still see the impacts of these Celtic cultures, even if it's kind of through a Roman lens. Now, unlike the Romans, the Celts did not have a strong centralized network of government. In fact, they were often in conflict with each other. And while today we kind of think of Celtic culture as one homogeneous thing, when you're covering that much land area, it's going to be very culturally diverse. What they did have that unified them was language. So here we see a tree of the Proto-Indo-European languages. Right down here, we see the Germanic languages where English is. Here we see the Latin derivative languages, the Romance languages, Spanish, Italian, French. And up here, we see a lot more red. That means it's a dead language. This is the Celtic languages. And I want to take a closer look here. We see that with the Celtic languages, and that was the unifying thing of the Celtic cultures, we kind of have two branches. We have the island branches, the British Isles, where we see the only living languages to these days in Ireland and Britain. But we also see there were a lot of Celtic languages on continental Europe that died out or got absorbed as the Romans started their rampage across Europe. And the reason that we associate Celtic culture with the British Isles today is that for the same reason that the British Isles was one of the last places that the Celts went, because it's harder to get to, it was one of the later places that the Romans went. And in fact, they never even, went all the way out to Ireland. They started taking over Britain. And so I just think it's fascinating imagining a few hundred years from now, if English was kind of mostly eradicated, but we had this sense of this ancient culture called the Angles. And, there used to be all these cultures that spoke English, but let's just say Australia was the hardest to get to. So it stuck around there. They didn't invade Australia for a lot longer, the next conquering people group. And so eventually, after a few hundred years, what people thought of the Angles when they thought of Angle culture, English-speaking culture, they just thought of Australians. Maybe they would have a holiday where they would just be, it would be kangaroos and shrimp on the Barbie. And so I think that's kind of what we're getting here is we think of, because Ireland was kind of the last vestige of Celtic culture, we just tend to think of what the Irish Celts and their culture, but really it was a lot more diverse than that. And I just want to briefly share, to get back to Spain, a few cultural things that you can see from the Iberian Celts, the Celto-Iberians. So one thing that I think is really interesting is Emily was correct that the Celts very rarely had written languages. This is around the time that the Romans started invading, and there are just a few examples of written Celtic language. So these are the Botorrita plaques found near modern-day Zaragoza. And the Iberian Celts used the script of the regular Iberian tribes. So they didn't really have their own script. They kind of would use Latin or the Iberian script and just try to write their language in that. And this is pretty boring. It's just some land dispute with people's signatures on the back, but is one of the few examples of a written document in a Celtic language, this one being the Celt-Iberian language. Also, if you want to do some prehistoric sightseeing, you can go to a castro. A castro was a settlement, usually perched on a hillside with a little fortification around it. And this is just a little village that people would live in. People that lived in the plains during a time of war, they would come up to these castros kind of in the mountains to stay safe. And this is the Castro de Chano, which is just outside of Asturias. But you can visit various castros throughout northwestern Spain. We see here some of the stonework they're in. And most of them can be found in Galicia. And Galicia, this province in the very northwest corner of Spain, is the one that is most synonymous with Celtic culture in Spain today. In fact, you can find the Escola de Gaitas. This is I'll say bagpipe, but a gaita is a little bit different. It only has one pipe coming out instead of three, like the Scottish bagpipes. But this is essentially a bagpipe school. They have the Festival de Ortigueira, which is an annual festival in Galicia in which they invite specifically Celtic musicians from all around the world to celebrate Celtic heritage. And just generally, you'll also find a lot of impact of Celtic in the Galician language. Even though Galician is a Romance language, it has a lot of words that it took from Celtic origin. And I don't know if I'm, again, just falling guilty to the association with Ireland, but looking out here, I do wonder if the Celts just had kind of a penchant for beautiful rolling green landscapes and kind of the mysticism that goes along with it.
Gabe, that was amazing. Thank you so much. And I've been thinking about the same thing of how funny it is that in these Celtic nations that we still have today, the landscapes look so similar. It feels a bit mystical.
Mhm.
So thank you so much for that overview. And there is something that you mentioned that I want to go back to. So you mentioned that you studied abroad in England. Did you run into any interesting Celtic history or folklore there?
I did. So this will be very quick. I recommend looking this up more, but there's a great story. Some of you may have heard of it about a female warrior named Boudica, who her husband was the king of the Iceni Celtic tribe in Britain. And after his death, the Romans wanted to consolidate that territory into the expanding province of Britannia. And Boudica decided to lead a force of rebel Celts against the Romans. She actually took over the town that was Londinium, so the origin of London. She was the first person to set London on fire, and almost managed to kick the Romans out of Britain, but they did eventually defeat her in battle. She had a fairly tragic end, but she was quite heroic before that. So, yeah, definitely look up Boudica. It is a fascinating piece of Celtic history.
Well, thank you so much, Gabe. And speaking of royalty, we are in the presence of another MNT royal. It is our queen, Miss Lisa Friend, Mrs. Lisa Friend, excuse me. Lisa, thank you for joining us this evening.
I don't normally get called a queen, but here, Slancha.
Slancha.
Thank you, everyone. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I am here tonight to talk about Ireland, celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and I'm very grateful that Emily has invited me. So, Em, how's it going?
It's going well, and I would also like to say thank you for sticking with us. I know there's been some bumps, but things are looking up. And Lisa, I know you are it's no secret you're a lover of Ireland, and so I was wondering if we could go back to your first trip to Ireland, and was it love at first sight, or was this love grown over time?
Oh no, this was immediate. As a lot of people in our audience know, I'm from the Pacific Northwest. I thought I understood the color green until I went to Ireland and went, no, ding dang, they have got so much more green, so many shades of green, and the beautiful rolling hills and the friendly people. And I went for the first time in 1999, and I went to do the Dublin Marathon to raise money for the Arthritis Foundation, because my dear friend has rheumatoid arthritis, and so I wanted to challenge myself to do that. And while I was walking the 26.2 miles, because I walked, not like Gabe, our runner, I walked the 26.2 miles. I just fell in love with the city of Dublin. And then I led my own group of friends out in a minivan tour of the countryside and madly, madly fell in love with the country. And I'm going to show you my favorite Celtic corner of the Emerald Isle. So my favorite Celtic corner is the town of Dingle in the southwest corner of Ireland. It's not undiscovered, but I have been going there since 1999 and am crazy about it. So it's a Gaeltacht, so it's an Irish speaking part of the country. Of course, you're not going to have any trouble with signs or people speaking English, but if you walk up to two people, they might be speaking Irish and then they'll turn and seamlessly switch to English for you. But it's also a coastal fishing village. So fishing was its main bread and butter for many years, and they still do. What? Do what?
Oh, you
I
went
went
the
that
wrong
way?
Yes.
Well, I was just driving on the opposite side of the road.
That's right.
So anyway, so you can see by this map that Dingle's in the southwest corner. If you were just trying to get to Dingle as fast as possible, the nearest airport would be Shannon. And my friends, Big John and Elaine O'Connor from Coastline Tours will pick you up at the airport if you arrange that, or you can take a bus, or you can rent your own car. We'll talk a little bit about driving in Ireland, but you can get the 2.5 to 3 hours over to Dingle. And like I said, it's a fishing village. They still have ships going out every day. And it is a beautiful town of about 1,700. So really similar to the size of the town that I grew up in. So I feel very much at home. The main and most important and most awe-inspiring thing to do in Dingle is to do the Slayhead Loop or Dingle Peninsula. It's a 30-mile drive around the coastline, and it's one of the most spectacular things that you'll do. I highly recommend getting a car and driver if that's within your resources, because for one thing, it means that both of the people in the car will get the chance to look around as much as possible. It will also reduce the stress level of everybody in the car because the roads are quite narrow. And as we mentioned, they do drive on the opposite side of the road from us. And you'll be able to gaze at the 50,000 sheep out there. And they'll even take you to places that you didn't know existed. This was probably the 5th time I went to Dingle, and Big John took me down to this pier that we have on the screen. And then he took me to another secret beach I didn't know about. And I was you can see from my face, I was so happy.
It almost looks like you're in Hawaii in that.
Does it
last
really?
picture, yes.
Wow, I didn't know. I only been to Hawaii once. Yeah, okay, so Ireland. Anyway, so it took me to this wonderful beach, and then he'll even show you where you can hug or cuddle a baby lamb, which is a little bit cheesy and definitely touristy, but come on, when do you get a chance to get all that lanolin on your hands and give a little squeeze to a baby lamb?
It's okay to be a tourist, guys.
Yeah,
it's okay to be a tourist.
Absolutely. So the big sites on this drive, besides the gorgeous views I mentioned, are the ancient sites of the Gallerist Oratory. This was built 1,300 years ago, and it's an amazing example of a well-preserved early Christian church that was built entirely without mortar, and the stones are slanted ever so slightly. On the outside, they're slanted to the bottom, I guess, so that the rain goes down the outside and doesn't come on the inside. And not that far from the Gallerist Oratory is the Kilmacader Church. And the Kilmacader Church is from the 12th century, but in front of the church there is an Ogham stone, which is spelled O-G-H-A-M, but it's pronounced Ogham. This Ogham stone is likely from the 6th century, and later people carved a hole in it. So if you can see in the picture that there's a hole in it, and it's near my friend Hallie's head, who you may recognize from other shows. She's a wonderful traveling companion, but people would stick their thumbs through the hole when they were making like a business contract or an important promise. So they would do that. And they've been doing that for 14, 15, 1,600 years. Back in town, you've got some artisans to visit. So there's the wonderful Sean, who owns the Dingle Crystal Factory. Sean was trained at Waterford in the art of crystal cutting, and he brought that knowledge to Dingle. And one of the things that he loves to do is to make these crystal beehive huts that are inspired by some of the ancient sites out on the Slayhead. So you can see this in the picture, but also I took this picture a few years ago when they had just finished filming another one of the Star Wars movies. And so they were all these little Han Solos and Stormtroopers and Darth Vaders nearby. And also one of the fun things to do in Dingle is to get a Guinness beer, right? But also, or cider. You want to show the cider? We're going to talk about the cider again. This is Magner cider, so I really like that. But you can do that at Dick Mack's Pub. And at Dick Mack's Pub, there is a man who makes belts while you wait. So he will cut it and size it and clamp the belt buckle on and stamp it with your initials and decoration if you want to. So here is the last gentleman who did this, doing this for my friends Pete and Mark. So I would highly recommend. That's a wonderful souvenir, practical and long lasting. I have mine still. For nature lovers and animal enthusiasts, Dingle is also an excellent place to visit. So over at the recommended Milltown House Hotel, There is the Dingle falconry experience, and Gabe has put all of the links will be in the chat and they'll be in the follow-up email. But this is super fun if you've ever wanted to get up close and personal with a golden eagle or an owl or a hawk. You can do that right on the lawn of Milltown House, and they will flit between you and your gloved, i.e. protected hand. There's my very brave daughter, Nora, and her dad holding this sweet baby owl. For other naturey and animal things, you can take a rigid inflatable boat, RIB, rib boat, and you can take it out from Dingle. Years ago, there was a wonderful dolphin named Fungi that lived there. He lived there until October of 2020, and I will say that he was not a victim of COVID. I think that he retired off to the coast of Spain. That's my story, and I am sticking to it. But besides going and seeing Fungi, who's not there anymore, obviously you're going to want to go out to the sea cliffs because it's really a nice visit. It's fun to ride on those inflatable boats. You're like, well, you feel like you're riding this wild bucking horse, and you might see puffins or seals, and sometimes basking sharks will come nearby. Those big, have you seen a basking shark with they have the most enormous mouths? They're like plankton feeders, and their mouths open that big. And they say that there are people who think that it was a basking shark that inspired the tale of Jonah and the whale, because their mouths were big enough that they could swallow a man, but then they wouldn't really want to. So
have you seen one of these in the flesh?
I dream of it. I need to make
You're
that
a braver woman than I
would jump in. I would jump in the water. I would, with a basking
I will stay on the
shark.
boat and take pictures.
So that's some of the things that you can see for your nature lovers. But fishing and the sea are in the DNA of the people of Dingle, as evidenced by this charming little boy in his fishing gear. So you're going to have some of the best seafood that you ever had in your life. My favorite seafood restaurant in the entire world, and this is saying something because I am from the Oregon coast, is called Out of the Blue Seafood. And it is this beautiful mashup of a French chef, the best local ingredients, and a casual, cool vibe. You're going to need reservations because it's small, but I go there every time I'm in Dingle. And it seems from this picture and the next one that I almost always eat the scallops. So I highly recommend them. And they have the best Irish soda bread that I've ever had. So I would recommend Out of the Blue Seafood. But I would be remiss if I did not also mention that Dingle has some of the best ice cream. Condé Nast Traveler Magazine voted Murphy's Ice Cream one of the best ice creams in the world. There are 2 locations in Dingle, and they have fun flavors like Irish brown bread or Dingle sea salt or Dingle gin. If you mix the sea salt and the gin ones, are very delicious. And they're very generous with their samples. So you're going to want to hit Murphy's while you're in town. And then one of the things that Dingle is famous for is it has 52 pubs. We should take a drink. So 52 pubs, one for each week of the year. And that leads to plenty of work for local musicians. So when you're in a pub, you can drink Guinness, right? Guinness tastes better in Ireland than anywhere else. You can drink local spirits. The Dingle Distillery is very nice. They have their own Dingle gin, which I mentioned, the Dingle whiskey, Dingle vodka. Makes a very nice souvenir as you leave the country. I hit it up at the duty free, and it makes my husband very happy. And here we are drinking cider because I'm a big fan of Irish cider. And I just want to prove to you, Emily, because you thought I'd never heard that before. See in this picture, there's ice in my glass.
Okay.
So you can get your Irish cider with ice cubes. So I find that to be a lovely drink. It's my favorite. But you can also drink soft drinks in a pub, and nobody is going to look at you askance. So you don't need to worry about it, because you're going to want to go to the pubs. It is the most social place. If you're in a pub and you go and stand at the bar, then you're saying to people that you're open to talking, right? If you go and sit at a table, not really anybody is going to talk to you. So if you stand at the bar, you're saying, hi, I'm here for socializing. It's fun. But pubs are a big way of life. And so, like I said, even if you don't drink, you're going to want to hit the pub. So early on, you're going to have some good crack, which is Irish for a good time, fun and pleasantry. And then as the night gets a little bit later, then they're going to bring the musicians in. So you have two types of bars. You have maybe a little bit more rowdy or sing-along type bars, or pubs, I should say, or you have traditional or trad music. So we have some examples. So this is what a good pub looks like. So you can see they're all bellied up to the bar, chatting, chatting, chatting. And then this is an example that I took for you of a modern sing-along. And if you sing along at home, I will just respect you even more. So that's some more modern singing at a slightly more rowdy bar. And then if you want trad music, you know what you want to do is you want to talk to somebody you meet on the street or your hotel person or anyone. You're going to ask for what kind of vibe you're interested in. So I'm a big sing-along person. It might not surprise anyone. So I'm going to the rowdy bar with sing-along, but every once in a while I do like a wee fiddle. So then I want the traditional or trad music. So you just ask for what bars have the vibe. And it was so funny. I was there just in October and they said, oh, this one's like this and this one like this and this one's like kind of Enya on Valium. And I was like, oh, that's a very that's a sleepy musician that I'm not as interested in. But you know, that might have been the right vibe for somebody that night. But let's listen to a little bit more traditional music. This is a slightly shorter clip. Okay, so that's my favorite Celtic corner, the Dingle Peninsula. I am super grateful to have been invited. Emily didn't have to share her show with me, but she did, and I'm so grateful. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Lisa. And I am so happy to hear that you are also a fan of Irish trad music, because I think you're really going to appreciate the next segment of our show. And so we are actually going across the pond to the United States to listen to some Irish American folk music. And some people may not know that the American musical landscape really owes so much to Irish immigrants. And, you know, you can take country music, for example. Back in the 18th century, there was actually a wave of Irish settlers who ended up making their home in Appalachia. And they are the ones who are responsible for introducing the Irish fiddle to the region. And, you know, fast forward a couple centuries, and the fiddle is one of the most important instruments in country music today. And even, you know, the settlers who didn't have instruments, they still were storytellers, and they still brought over these traditional Irish songs that they passed down from generation to generation. And some believe that that is the root of, you know, country music's tradition today of taking really simple lyrics to tell a good story. So we have a lot to be thankful for to those Irish settlers who brought over their musical traditions. And I could go on and on about the ways they contributed, but I want to listen to some music. And so we are actually going to hear some of the very songs that Irish settlers brought over to America. And they are both unearthed and performed by Irish American musician and writer Melanie Beth Curran. So I am excited to introduce you all to...
I am a folk and traditional musician of Irish American descent. In 2024, I discovered field recordings of Irish Americans in the Library of Congress. Most of the songs I'd never heard before. They were beautiful, They illuminated hidden corners of the Irish American experience. Did they not have great significance? Why then were they here, collecting digital dust, all but forgotten? I started transcribing them, singing them, and performing them out in the wild. Here are a few I learned and performed.
And what has a poor girl but her name to defend her? No, Barney, my Barney, I won't let you in.
What has a poor girl but her name to defend her? No, Barney, my Barney, I won't let you in. And early the next morning, a knock came to my door.
You always had those section men go out and chop me wood, and bring me water from the well, and split me kindling fine.
You always had those section men go out and chop me wood, and bring me water from the well, and split my kindling fine.
It's time to make a fresh album of the old songs. Not only are they historically significant, they are valuable in today's world. They speak to universal themes surrounding displacement, longing, searching, loving, assimilating, departing, arriving, and enduring the effects of colonization. I hope the music can act as a bastion of hope for immigrants and refugees arriving in new places today. My fluency as an American old-time musician allows me to be a bridge between these two rich musical landscapes, America's and Ireland's. I am working within my community of traditional musicians to craft beautiful recordings. The original songs on the album are inspired by sounds in the field recordings and by my family's own Irish American identity. I hope to perform the old songs in places from which they hail, like Beaver Island in Michigan, the historic mining town of Butte, Montana, the South Shore Irish Heritage Trail in Massachusetts, and hopefully in County Donegal in Ireland, where my family is from. Folk music tells us who we are and gives us hope about who we can be. There is a lot of love in this music.
Okay, so that was just a little introduction to Melanie's work, and I actually got to see her perform in Pike Place Market last fall, and it was really such a unique concert experience. She's really good at weaving storytelling and history into each song she performs, and some of the songs are using melodies that are centuries old, and then some of them are songs that she has just written, and so she sort of takes you on this journey through the evolution of Irish American music. And I know when I've been preparing this show, these songs have been getting stuck in my head. They're so catchy. So I've been singing them at home, and my boyfriend might be tired of hearing them, but yeah, Melanie has some upcoming performances around the New York area and Philly and Rhode Island. And so if you're in the area, you can definitely check out her upcoming events on her website. And if that is not your neck of the woods, Gabe has just dropped some links into the chat where you will find her music on her website. So now we are going to hear just a couple more songs that Melanie has performed.
On a cold winter's night, as the tempest was snarling, and the snow-covered cabin and sty, Barney went over the hills to his darling, and tapped at the window where Kathleen did lie. And Acushla said she, "Are you asleep or awaken? The night's bitter cold, and my coat it is thin, and the storm it is brewing, and the frost it is aching. Oh, Kathleen Mulverney, won't you let me in?" she spoke through the window. Would you be taking me out of my bed? For to come at this hour, 'tis a shame, 'tis a sin too. It's whiskey, not love, got into your head. If your heart it was true, of my fame you'd be tender, and consider the time, and there's nobody in. What has a poor girl but her name to defend her? Oh, Barney, my Barney, I won't let you in.
So what do you think of Barney and Kathleen?
Barney's not getting into the house. I can tell that. That was fantastic. I really felt like I was somewhere else, maybe in a pub in Ireland, but that was just, I really enjoyed that because I, unlike Em, have not been listening to this for weeks and weeks as she prepared this show. So that was the first time I heard it. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Great. I'm happy to share. And obviously it's a beautiful song, but one of the reasons why I chose this song to share from Melanie's album is because the original field recording, which Melanie's music is based off of, is from Beaver Island, Michigan. And during the 19th century, when many Irish immigrants were fleeing the potato famine, especially in Donegal, they ended up in Beaver Island, Michigan, and they sort of recreated Donegal on Beaver Island. And so, that song ended up there from one of these people that was, they needed a new home. And so just really interesting history attached to a lot of this music if you dig a little deeper. All right, well, we have one more song from Melanie this evening, and this is a song that she performed very recently on St. Bridget's Day in Boston.
It is only in my wildest dreams that I would be standing here with you all on this special day. I really, really love Bridget in her goddess and saint forms, in whatever form she takes. And the reason, I kind of came into Bridget worship from the back door. I was doing research on kind of Tin Pan Alley music, and I found out that a lot of the Tin Pan Alley music was based around, a lot of this Irish stereotype around women were based on this stereotype called Bridget, also called Bridget, because so many young women had moved to New York City in the time of the famine, the genocide, and at that point they so many of them were named Bridget that they became a stereotype, and it's a very derogatory stereotype about a huge group of people who happen to have the name of this goddess and saint. And so anyway, this song I found is called I'm Thinking Ever Thinking, and when I hear it from the perspective of one of those women, kind of maybe like an underbelly of the stereotypes of the era, which is 1840s. Actually, the stereotype lasted all the way until 1912. Anyway, I'm a nerd, and I'm going to be telling you nerdy stuff, so buckle up. Oh, joy came to my bosom as I reached Coven Cork. On board a white star liner, and I landed in New York. The houses were all jasper, and the streets were paved with gold, and the ladies in their splendor so charming to behold. I'm thinking, ever thinking, by night as well as day.
Once I was disappointed when first I crossed the foam. There were 3 days' work laid out for me against everyone at home to be working for in farmers. I'd rather be hung and be listening to the jibing of a jibing foreign tongue. I'm thinking, never thinking, by night as well as day. I'm thinking, never thinking of those green hills far away. I'm thinking of those marshy banks and the valleys down below, and my heart is in lovely Erin, where the 3-leaf shamrock grows.
Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I really like this song because it captures that theme that just comes up over and over again in Irish music of emigration to a faraway land and longing for home. And it actually reminded me of going to Scotland last summer. And I was in Oban and I had befriended this couple, and they said that they were going to take me out to hear some live music. And so I was all pumped. I was thinking I was going to hear some Scottish trad, but the bar only played American country music. And I can tell you, the Scots also love John Denver, Take Me Home Country Roads. And so
Who doesn't?
who doesn't? And it's this interesting phenomenon where there's almost been like a boomerang effect of this type of music. And I think that, you could probably, if you isolated someone and they had never heard John Denver before and maybe the words West Virginia weren't in it, you could probably convince someone that that song was written in Ireland because it sounds so much like these Irish traditional songs. So I just thought that was kind of a funny full circle moment.
Well, I have 2 things to add to that. One, I think that Melanie, her name's Melanie.
Yes.
Melanie captured the melancholy of Irish music so perfectly. And my modern sense was like, pick it up a little bit. But I was like, no, this is from a time when music was the only entertainment. So all of these pauses and these long drawn out phrases were important. The other thing I wanted to say is she talked about taking a White Star liner from Cove, which is the last place the Titanic set sail from. And I was just there in October, and it was the last port of call for many, many Irish people emigrating to the New World. So that was very sort of inspiring to me. And then the last thing I will say, just as an American who also really enjoys country music, I was in a pub in Ireland last year and with my dear friend Karen, and we are 2 girls from small Oregon towns. And so the music had kind of finished for the evening, and these people, and I think they were, honest to God, I think they were English, which is probably why we did this. They started singing Country Roads, but they only knew the chorus. And my patriotic American tushy got all up in arms, and I was like, don't you sing our song if you don't know all the words. And she and I started belting it out at the top of our lungs, which was silly and fun, but it led to the best thing, because there was a woman who was sitting right next to us, probably in her 60s. She was a large woman. She had this big presence, and she started singing with us, and we got her to sing for the rest of the night, and people were coming up and asking, and she had the most beautiful voice, and she was just singing a cappella all these lovely songs, and it was just the most magical moment. So thank you, John Denver, for that.
Thank you, John Denver. Thank you, Melanie, for treating us to this music tonight. And that brings us now to the last segment of our show. And so we are going back across the Atlantic to the rugged shores of Brittany with guide and chef Emma Ledoux, and she's going to give us a little tour of her native region. But first, I also would like to remind you all that we will be having a Q&A after we visit Brittany. And so please submit your questions in the Q&A widget. Thank you.
I'm gonna be so sorry you invited me to sit with you.
Never.
Hi, everybody. My name is Emma Ledoux, and I am a resident of the Pacific Northwest, and I'm also a native of Brittany, the west part of France, that's a Celtic region. So I teach the Brittany cooking classes in the Pacific Northwest. And I also take small groups of people, usually from the Pacific Northwest, to my native land of Brittany, with my tour company called Preps and Travel. So let's talk about Brittany, the Celtic region of France. Brittany is the Celtic region of France. It has 6 commonalities with the other Celtic regions of Europe. First, a little bit about Brittany. It is what I call the nose of France. If you were to imagine that Paris right here in the center, that would be the eye. And if you imagine Bordeaux in the southwest would be the mouth, kind of a sad mouth, then Brittany, that peninsula here, is the nose. Yeah, that's just southwest of Normandy. The first commonality with these other Celtic regions is the Neolithic sites. There are lots of Neolithic sites in Brittany. We're talking about a really long time ago. We're talking about 5000 BCE. Here, we're talking about Karnak, where we have these alignments of menhir. The menhir are these stones. They can be they can be small, they can be 2 to 3 feet tall, or they can be huge. They can be up to 70 feet tall. And in this site of Karnak, for some reason, 5,000 years ago, people have decided to align them, and they're still there. It's quite magic. We still don't quite know why they've done this, and that's kind of still a mystery. Another type of Neolithic site is the dolmen, and it's basically this menhir on the sides and then a flat stone at the top. And usually these were being used for funeral homes. This one is in open air. And then you have some others where they've been covered by ground and by stones. If that's the case, we call them cairn or tumulus. This one specifically is in Gavrinis. There is another one in Barnenez that might be the oldest man-made structure in Europe. Neolithic and the Celts. The Celts were very much connected to nature. The passing of the seasons, the importance of milestones like birth and marriage and death. And they were doing a lot of spiritual events, and they were using these prehistorical sites as sacred sites. The second commonalities with the other Celtic regions are arts and symbols. The triskel that you see on the left represent either water, earth, and air, or it can represent as well birth, middle age, or the old ages. The knot in the middle is also a symbol, an art that you're going to see a lot in Brittany art. And then the Hermine is kind of the later Celt time, going into the medieval time. That's a symbol that you're going to see all over Brittany. You see it on the flag of Brittany, another important symbol. The third commonalities with the other Celtic regions is the music. We see here Alan Stivell, a famous Breton artist that is playing the harp. The Celtic harp is much smaller than regular harps. And then there are numerous festivals, and festivals, the instruments that are used are the Breton bagpipe, the violin, the guitar, the drum, a lot of voices. There are lots of festivals. Here we see the Festival Interceltique de Lorient that happens in the middle of the summer in August. And all these regions of the Celtic worlds get together for that. In the region I grew up in the north, in Lannion, there is the Sonneurs du Printemps, and that's a smaller festival, but really fun as well. The Fest-Noz is, if you translate it, it means the feast of the night. And usually people from all generations gather. This is in one of the big stages, but it's also in every little town where people will get together on Friday night or Saturday night in the gymnasium of the town, and they will dance on the sound of Brittany music. My favorite of the different music style that you get would be the Can Hadis Can, and that's an a cappella call and response that you can dance on, and it's really fun and beautiful, I think. The commonality number 4 of these Celtic regions is the connections to the element, connection through the air, connection through nature. The air of Brittany is really pure and fresh. You feel good when you are breathing it. It puts you in a good mood. The landscape of Brittany is absolutely stunning. It's a very cut coast. It has white sand beaches. This is the beach on the island I grew up in, and then you go a little further either east or you go at the very west, and you get these cliffs and very rough areas with often a lot of wind. And then you also have fishing ports here, Douarnenez, that's very famous for its sardines. So connection to the element, we can also taste it. Brittany has a lot of seafood and fish. We can see here the mussels of Bouchot. Bouchot is a wooden post that you put there, and because the tides in Brittany are huge, they will go up and then they will go down, and they will do that twice every day, meaning that that current is going to be there, so the mussels will be able to get all their nutrients from the sea, from that natural waves, and the mussels are absolutely delicious. Also delicious are the oysters going through that same waves of the tides. My favorites are either in Paimpol, it's very close to home. The mussels of Paimpol are crunchy and salty. And then there are also the one from Cancale, that's also on the north coast, more on the east side. Cancale has a market where every single day you can buy your mussels, and you can also buy yourself a little glass of white wine to go with it. Sit over there looking at the sea. If it's a clear day, you might even be able to see at the horizon Le Mont Saint-Michel. Absolutely stunning. The crepes. Half of the restaurants in Brittany are creperies, and we do sweet crepes and we do savory crepes. The savory crepes are made with buckwheat flours. The butter is always salted butter, and they are absolutely delicious. You can have them with a glass of hot cider, and I don't really think there is anything better than that. It's really delicious. And we take making our crepes really seriously. It's really an art. They need to be generous in size and they need to be super thin. It's great to have little holes in your crepes or your galettes because then when you add your butter, it's going to get it moist and delicious. Another delicacy is the Queen Amande. The Queen Amande is a croissant. So it has this lamination, and within this lamination, you have salted buttered caramel inside. And Queen Amande in the Breton language means cake with butter. That's actually embedding my fifth commonality between these Celtic regions, which is the language. Welsh, Cornish, Irish, Gaelic, Breton are coming from the same roots, the same Gaelic roots of languages. And commonality number 6, and that's going to be our last one, is the legends and the mystics. We're talking about the legends of King Arthur. Here we're seeing in the forest of Brocéliande the tomb of Merlin the wizard. Merlin the wizard had brought up Arthur in Brocéliande, and that's really in the center of Brittany. And from there, Arthur had pulled out the Excalibur sword from the magic stone when he was 16, and he became the king and the king of the Knights of the Round Table. Lots of mystics, lots of legends around Brittany. So I think that Brittany is an absolutely beautiful and mystic Celtic region. It has a lot of commonalities with the other Celtic regions, and it also has its uniqueness, its pride, it has character. I do hope that you will visit, and perhaps you will visit with me with Crepes on Travel. And I also want to wish you a happy St. Patrick's Day.
Okay, so that was Emma Ledoux. And did she make you hungry?
Oh my goodness. I was just very excited by a lot of the stuff she was talking about.
Yeah, she speaks about food in such a just vivid way. When I was filming this with her, I said, "You are making me hungry. It's lunchtime and I haven't eaten yet." So
and they do such a beautiful job in Brittany because I have not spent a lot of time there, but it's on my list of places I want to spend more time. And the oysters at Cancale and Paimpol, and I'm like, oh, they're delicious. And they do mussels, and because they're French, they do mussels also with cream and white wine, and those are juicy and plump. And then I didn't know, because I haven't seen this, she brought out Queen Amande, and I was like, that, my friend turned me on to that probably 3 years ago, and it is one of the best pastries I've ever had in my life. And so for her to talk about that, I was very excited.
yes, so Emma, she does lead small group tours around Brittany, and you can find more information about those at her website. And for those of you who are lucky enough to live in the Pacific Northwest, if you're in the Seattle area, she does lead crepe making classes at the Pantry in Ballard. So you can check those out on her website as well. All right, well, it has come to the time of the evening where we will answer some questions from the audience, but first we do have a quick word from our sponsor. And Lisa, who is our sponsor this evening?
Well, our sponsor, as per usual, is Rick Steves Europe. But what we want to talk about is our big bag sale. So when we say big bags, we mean our carry-on size, larger suitcases, not little day packs. We only put them on sale twice a year. So they are on sale right now for 20% off. The sale is going on through next Tuesday, March 25th, which will line up very nicely for those of you who watch my packing show next Monday, March 24th, and think, gosh darn it, I need a new bag. So you'll get it for 20% off.
All right. Thank you, Lisa. And on that note, I have a couple questions about Ireland for you. And let's see, we'll start with Kathy's question, and she wants to know what the public transit is like in Ireland.
So the public transit in Ireland is friendly and friendly. It does not go everywhere. So if you're just going across from like Galway to Dublin, there's a great train. It works really well. If you're going from city to city, Cork to Dublin or Belfast to Dublin, it works really, really well. Otherwise, you're going to be more likely serviced by buses, and they work, but they're not nearly as frequent as one might want. And I do have a story of my friends getting dropped off on a bus, and they said, just stand here. And so they're standing on the side of the road, and 15 minutes later, another bus came by that was going where they were going. But I mean, that caused a little bit of, anxiety for them. So public transportation, if you're going city to city, works well. If not, very seriously consider renting a car or taking a Rick Steves tour. They're very good. You can sit on big, tall buses and overlook the hedgerows, and it's very relaxing. And you can drink cider at lunch.
That's right. Okay, so Bob is wondering, how can you find great pubs for trad music while traveling?
Well, you can always contact the tourist information office. They'll always have a good listing of what live events are happening in your area. And then if you're staying at a B&B or a hotel, that's another great place to look. And this is whether you're in Ireland or Brittany or Spain. Those are going to be your best resources for information. Of course, you can look on the internet, but the tourist information office is really, I think, my first point of contact for live events in a city.
Thank you, Lisa. And let's see, I think we have time for one more. And Stacy is wondering what your favorite castles and ruins are to visit in the Celtic Corners that we've covered tonight. And, we didn't get to Scotland, we didn't get to Wales. So if those are speaking to you.
I mean, if I were gonna cheat, it was mentioned very briefly. Emma said, and in the distance, you might be able to see Mont Saint-Michel. And while it is not a castle, it looks like it's a castle. It's actually an abbey built on an island. And it is one of the most stunning medieval structures I've ever seen. And it is so popular with day trippers that it's like salmon swimming upstream when you get there. But stay one night, get there at 3 in the afternoon, 4 in the afternoon, go over across the causeway to the island, go see the church. You'll be one of the last people in there. Especially, this is great in the summer when the days are so long. By the time you come out, all the tourists will be gone. You'll have the island practically to yourself. And then the next morning you get up, and as the tide of people are coming in, you're on your way to the D-Day beaches or Brittany or somewhere else.
And you mentioned tide of people, but I haven't visited Mont Saint-Michel, but you can only access it at certain times of day, correct? Due to the tide, or is that no longer true?
You are thinking actually of Mount St. Michael, which is off the English coast, which you can only access when the tide is out. But Mont Saint-Michel, its brother, has a causeway, so the tide can come in and around it, but you can visit 24 hours a day, you have access.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
You're welcome.
Well, on that note, I think that brings us to the end of our show. And I just want to thank my 4 fabulous contributors, Gabe, Lisa, Emma, and Melanie, for contributing some amazing content to this show. And next week, you will see the lovely Lisa Friend back on screen for her second packing class. And until then, happy travels.